Hello and welcome. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, my name is Jonathan Doe, and I like to collect artifacts and relics from infamous true crime cases. And this is my show where I share with you pieces from that collection and the stories behind them. Today I have an exceptional episode because I'm going to be sharing with you one of the holy grails in my Murderabilia collection. What I have here is an authentic human skull, which was owned by grave robber, murderer, and cannibal Nico Claux. And I actually purchased this skull from him directly. But what also makes this episode exceptional is not only are we going to be going back and talking about Nico's history, but we're going to actually let the man himself tell his own story. That's right. In today's episode, we are going to be interviewing a cannibal. So let's do that. This is Murderabilia, Show and Tell. Welcome back to Murderabilia Show and Tell. I'm sitting here over Skype with Nico Claux, the vampire of Paris. How are you doing today, man?
I'm good. Just came back from Germany, but I'll tell you all about that later.
Oh, awesome. So for anyone who's listening who may not be familiar with who you are, can you give us a brief summary of kind of your history and how you got the name the Vampire of Paris?
So I was convicted of a crime in the 90s, and I spent a few years in prison for murder. The press used that nickname, the tabloids, because I used to steal blood bags from the hospital, which was not directly connected to the murder case itself. It was something that I did while working in the hospital, but I also worked in a morgue. So they just used that nickname more because of my lifestyle and the things I did on the side than the actual murder itself, which was not a vampire murder per se. Yeah, I spent several years in prison, and I created my own company, which is called Serial Pleasures, and the website is serialpleasures.com, and I sell different things, t-shirts, collect and sell murderabilia, of course. And I'm kind of specialized in Issei Isagawa, the Japanese cannibal, and Armin Maives.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I've actually had the pleasure of purchasing a handful of Murderabilia items from you that we're going to be talking about a little bit more throughout this episode. But I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into like your own history. And I think one thing that people are really fascinated about, especially when it comes to murderers, is like learning about what your childhood was like. So what could you tell us about what your childhood was like and what it was like in your family home, what your parents were like?
There wasn't any abuse or violent things in the past, but my parents moved a lot because of my father's job. He was an IT technician, and he had to travel a lot around the world to work on networks for a bank, computer networks. So we would spend 2 years there and 2 years in another country, and so on and so on and so on until we moved back to Paris when I was 6 or 7 years old. But yeah, I grew up in many different countries like the UK, Switzerland, Africa, and Portugal. So it was very chaotic, and from an early age, I began to be obsessed with the macabre. But when I say obsessed, it's way more than your average childhood obsessions for vampire stories or horror stories, or Halloween stuff. I was deep into that kind of stuff. When I was about 10 years old, my grandfather passed away, and or the family more or less blamed me on that because we were playing a badminton game and it just collapsed during the game. So they kind of blamed me on the fact that I insisted on playing the game when he was not feeling well, and they kind of accused me of his death. And we all went to the funeral wake, and this is when it was the first time when I saw an actual dead person, and also the first time when I entered a funeral home, and I was just fascinated by the atmosphere. And I knew that later on I would work there.
So was he not in good health, and then you guys played the game and he collapsed for the game?
Yeah, he complained about headaches all the time, and he probably had a heart condition before, and he just collapsed, and there was what's it called? Blood clots. They found blood clots in the brain, cerebral blood clots. So this is what he died of, actually.
When your family started making accusations that it was your fault when you were a little kid, how did that feel to you? How did that impact you as a child?
Well, first, of course, there was this feeling of guilt, but also I felt a weird feeling of actually having done something that was against the natural order. And something that was spiritually relevant in a way. And because I really thought that I had taken his life. So there was this ambivalent feeling of actually feeling guilty because I really liked him, but at the same time I had this power over life and death. And when you're 10 years old and you are faced with that power, then anything can happen. So yeah, maybe it was definitely a turning point for me. And later on in my life, I was always looking for that same feeling, that feeling of actually being able to have power over those things. Yeah.
And then at his funeral, you said that there was a turning point where you realized that this was kind of something that you wanted to do as a career. What was it about that experience that made you feel that way, that you wanted to kind of go down that road?
I just felt that this place wasn't a normal place. It was like being between two worlds and being in between the living and the beyond. So there was this energy which is hard to describe. You can only feel it when you actually are used to working more. There's definitely an energy when you are in that place, in that kind of place, whether it's a funeral home or a morgue. So maybe it's the energy from the people grieving, or the energy of death itself. It kind of feels like being at a church for the first time, but the feeling is 10 times more powerful in a way. Because, religion is based on the fear of death. And there is no better or worse place to experience this feeling than a funeral home, when you think about it. So yeah, I was focused on that when I was a teenager and later on.
And then also at a young age, some of the first crimes that you started to commit was grave robbery. And I was wondering, when did you start finding the urge to do that, and what was your first time that you actually took those steps to actually start entering cemeteries and opening graves?
I used to go to graveyards quite a lot. I would ditch school and go to graveyards. and I would just, walk among the tombs and try to look inside the bigger mausoleums because they had small windows um, where you could actually have a look inside the crypt. So I was intrigued by what was going on, what actually it was like down under. And it wasn't like, I woke up and I did it. It just took months and months of actually walking in those graveyards and just observing the locks and observing how things were made. Because I definitely had this obsession of wanting to see the corpses inside the coffins. So it became an obsession, and I couldn't focus on my studies or anything. And all I could think about all day long was actually doing it. And when you're that obsessed by something, you end up by doing it. So this is what I did. I studied lock picking. So they're really primitive locks, so it was kind of easy to find a way. The main problem was the rust, because those locks are really ancient and they're rusty. So, but there's ways of actually working on that. So that's what I did for a period of 1 year. And after a year, I finally managed to open the first one, and then it escalated. Yeah.
The very first time that you ever actually opened a grave and actually saw human remains, what was that experience like? What did it smell like? What did it look like? How did you feel?
The very first time, it was just bones.
Mm-hmm.
So, but at the same time, there's of course the smell of, dead wood and damp, and there's this special smell inside crypts, and there's also the fact that when you're doing this that you're doing something that will forever cast you aside from society. So yeah, it was intense, that's all I can say. I also felt this spiritual experience in a way, and I was hyper focused on what I was doing. So everything was overloaded. The sensation of, all my senses, they were overloaded by what was going on around me. So I don't know if you could compare this to taking a LSD, or I don't know, but it opened another door to perception.
Also, it's been reported that you took remains home at some point. When did you start doing that?
I was about 17. First, it was mainly bones, skulls, of course. Skulls inside coffins, usually they're very much deteriorated. They collapse. It's really rare that you have an intact skull with the mandible. So yeah, it's usually fragmented. And but yeah, I was bringing those things back to my place in the basement, because I was still living with my parents, and I had my own access to the basement. and I had this padlock, this cadness that I used to actually keep them from seeing what was inside, and they didn't ask any questions anyway. They thought it was my stuff. So I had all those things inside this little room downstairs, and then later on I had my own place, and I could actually decorate my own place. I was, like many kids before me, I was fascinated with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I wanted to have that kind of environment around me. I also was aware of Ed Gein. I had seen pictures. So yeah, this is something that I wanted to recreate, and something that I felt like was my safe place.
So were your parents aware that you had human remains around, like skulls and stuff? Had they seen them before, or were you hiding them from them?
Well, there was this time when I was at the army, and usually they would not enter my room, but this one time I was back. We had those permissions. You say that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. That was during the weekend, and during one of those permissions, I went to one of those graves, and I found a bag full of bones because they were cleaning up a vault. So they had put all the bones inside a plastic bag, and I just picked it up and I brought it home. So I had this huge bag with plenty of bones inside, and I just didn't have time to actually put it in a safe place. So I just stuffed them under my bed. And of course, when I came back 2 weeks later, my father had actually found the bones under the bed. So we had this discussion. Yeah.
What was that discussion like? Did you explain to him, where did you tell him they came from or anything like that?
Yeah, I just told him that I had a friend who gave it to them. Okay. Gave them to me. Yeah, it was from a friend. But I don't think he believed me. Yeah.
Did you ever open up any graves that contained, that were more fresh, that contained human flesh and things like that?
Yeah, there was a few times, yeah.
Did that have a different kind of experience than finding ones that had bones in them? Did you have a different sensation? What did that feel like?
Yeah, definitely. But I was, I was in such a state of mind that, I don't know, it was a psychotic state of mind, maybe. So, yeah, I just, I tried to cut her head once, but I didn't have the right tools, so I came back later, and then it was too deteriorated, so I just let it like that. But they actually found out about the casket, which was worse. I had left it wide open, so they found out about that. So I didn't go to that graveyard again.
In addition to all of talking about your youth, you also started practicing Satanism, and I was wondering how you discovered Satanism, and at what age, and what drew you to that ideology.
Well, actually, it started with a book that my father had, because he was deeply into ethnology. And it was a book about possession. So there was one part about possessions in African tribes and voodoo, and the other part was about the stories of possession in convents in the medieval times, and nuns, possessed nuns, etc. And inside the book, they show different images of the devil throughout history and throughout the world. And there was this statue of Pazuzu. the Assyrian demon that you can see in the movie The Exorcist. So I saw that image, that photo, and I felt, I don't know, some kind of connection. I was still small when I saw that. I was 7 years old, probably. So I knew there was still something there that I felt connected to, and this sparked an interest. So I started to read a lot of books about witchcraft and traditional witchcraft, Satanism, and what we had in Europe, and we still have in Europe, was a different kind of Satanism from the American version. It's two different things. And it's more here, it's more about devil worship in the classic sense, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the fact of making pacts with entities. If I would compare it to something, it would be this Lovecraftian lore, the might of Cthulhu, because Satanism is the idea that God doesn't like you, or God doesn't specially have a fondness for mankind, and God is just an energy which has no shape, and for me, for my perception of this energy, is there is absolutely nothing benevolent coming from that energy. If you look at the world, there's absolutely nothing especially kind in nature. Nature is cruel, and it's only the survival of the fittest. So, when you put 2 and 2 together, and you're a kid that's obsessed with those things, you start to create your own belief system. And for me, this belief system was based on the deep feeling that only death is real and nature is cruel. So that was my belief, and it still is.
So with your ideology, because you're talking about there's different types of Satanism, what is your concept of the afterlife? What do you think happens when you die, or what do you think will happen to you when you die?
I do believe in energy, and this is why I collect objects that were linked to crime, because I do believe that objects that belonged to serial killers, for example, still have the energy from those people attached to them. And this is why I like to go to murder houses, because I do feel the energy that they have. And of course, I do not believe in hell or heaven. Those concepts were created in the medieval times. It was a tool for the clergy to impose some kind of power over the people. And what I think is incredible nowadays is that there's actually people in the 21st century who still believe in those very simple and simplistic concepts of rewards. If you behave good during your life, you go to heaven. I think, well, it's beyond me why people believe in such things. But my belief system is way more complex than that, and it's actually based on observation. I observe what's going on, and I do believe in my senses. I do believe in the things that I feel, and I've worked in morgues and funeral homes for too many years to believe in this reward system, because at the end of the day, people who have led a very righteous life until the end. I don't see the difference when they die from people who are totally corrupt or decadent. They all go to the same place.
You brought up observing from your experience working in morgues and working in hospitals, and I think that's a good segue into this next part of your life. And you engaged in drinking human blood, and you also engaged in cannibalism. Which one of those came first? Did you drink blood first, or did you eat flesh first?
It was blood first, because I was during the morning I was working in the morgue, and in the afternoons I worked in a surgery unit. So one of the tasks that I had to do was to go to the blood bank, get blood bags, and bring them to during the operations. And there was this system with stickers attached to the blood bags, and if some of the blood bags were used during the operation, you had to remove the stickers and bring them back to the blood bank. And of course, when there were bags that were not used, instead of bringing them entirely, I would just bring the sticker and pretend that they had been used, because it was their system of doing it. And I was able to steal several bags a week like that. So I didn't drink everything, of course. It would have made me really sick, I guess. But yeah, I use most of it for ritualistic purposes. And sometimes I would even, just pour the contents of the bags on skulls that I had and things like that. Yeah.
What was the experience like the very first time that you drank human blood, and what did it taste like?
So you have to understand that it was very liquid because it's separated from the plasma. There's two different kinds of blood bags. There's the hemoglobin, the red cells, and then there's the plasma. So I would use the red cells. So it was extremely liquid. It didn't have the consistency of actual, blood that you drink from a wound, for example. So, and it was cold. So, but it gave me a rush. There's no denying that. And felt good.
I've read that you would mix blood with human ashes and drink that as well. Is that true?
Yeah, I've done it once or twice, but didn't taste really good. So yeah.
You talk about getting a rush from that. Could you explain a little bit what that rush felt like when you drank human blood?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was like nothing else, and it made me feel alive. That's the thing, and way more alive than the people I would see in the subway or in the streets. For me, everybody looked like ghosts. They had no consistency. And I would walk among them, and I felt like I was the only person alive. So that might be, seem weird when you're, usually when you hear about people who are obsessed with death, it might seem weird that those people, they actually feel alive when doing certain things, but that's the truth. Yeah, there's no other way to describe it.
So after you drank human blood, you kind of stepped it up a notch and actually started engaging in cannibalism. What can you tell us about your first cannibalistic? Actually, can we start about when did you start having cannibalistic urges? Before you practiced engaging in any of that, when did you start feeling urges to engage in that activity?
So it didn't start with an actual urge, but there's something that happened that started this interest of mine. And it was a magazine that was owned by my uncle. And he actually had a magazine which had pictures of the victim of Issei Sagawa, the Japanese cannibal.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this magazine, this French magazine, who had published photos that were leaked from inside the morgue where she was. So there was like 5 or 6 pages of photos of her body partially eaten, so you can actually see the cuts in the thighs and the breasts and the torso and the bits of flesh missing from the face. And imagine when you're 10 years old and way before you have access to the internet or those kind of things, and you see those kind of things. And yeah, it certainly created a shockwave. And I became obsessed with this idea and just curious about the experience. And, you know, usually people who are not really interested in cannibalism, the first question that they ask is, how does it taste like? And I can tell, when people ask me the question, I can tell that they never had this obsession before. Because that, if they were that obsessed with this wouldn't be the answer, the question that they would ask. Because it's irrelevant when you're obsessed with that. It's not about the taste. You don't eat people because you want to know how they taste like. It's totally something. It's totally different. It's about the act of chewing. It's about the energy. It's about some kind of, does it give you some kind of magical properties? But it's not about the culinary experience at all. You're not looking after taste or, yeah, no.
Yeah, so you're saying that it's more of an experience than you're doing it because it tastes good. It's more of a,
yeah.
You get something out of engaging in that practice rather than looking for your favorite food or anything like that.
Yeah, no. And for me, the question, when people ask me the question, it really shows that they have never actually had those thoughts before.
Yeah.
Because if they had, they wouldn't ask that question because they wouldn't care about how it tastes like. This is irrelevant.
So at what point did you actually find yourself in a position where you had the opportunity to eat human flesh, and what was that first, taking those steps and actually engaging that in that experience like?
So I was working in a morgue for about several months, and I had to assist to the autopsies and to actually stitch the cadavers, stitch them up. And there was lots of tissue that we were supposed to throw in special containers that were sent to the incineration. And instead of doing it, I would keep them. And I would bring them home and eventually try to cook them or, try different things with them. Yeah.
What was there a particular recipe that you preferred? Like, did you follow a recipe that you had read about from a different cannibal before, or what ideas came from it? That's a
good question, because I wanted more or less to recreate the Sagawa experience in a way. Mm-hmm. But I was limited as to what types of tissue I had access to, because I only had access to flesh from the abdominal cavities. And of course I had this craving for other pieces, but it would imply actually mutilating the cadaver, and it would have shown immediately, The other morgue workers would have noticed something if a big chunk of meat was missing from the arm or the leg. You see what I mean? So yeah, it I was limited as what I could do. The few bits of flesh that I was able to actually cut from the cadavers, I tried to, fry them and eat them with different kinds of side things, different condiments. But as I said, the question was not about doing something culinary. I'm no Hannibal Lecter. I leave that to fictional characters. Yeah, for me it was a rush. I was looking for the rush, definitely.
When you were working with the cadavers, were you often alone? How did you manage to take pieces of flesh home without getting
I was
caught?
alone, and my backpack was in the locker room. The locker room was next to the shower, where we would take a shower systematically after an autopsy, because it's the procedure. You have to go through the showers. At the end of an autopsy, the coroner left the place, and the less time they spend in the autopsy room, and the better. They prefer to actually leave it to the morgue attendant. Everything else, like stitching up and all those things, they just want to do to do the basic procedure and send everything to the lab, and then they leave you with the person on the slab. Yeah.
Was your experience eating human flesh different than the experience of drinking human blood? Did it feel different, or was it the same kind of rush?
It was the same kind of rush, I would say, except, it's the fact of escalating to something else also. And there was this feeling of being unstoppable.
Yeah.
So I could get away with those things without being caught. At the same time, I was extremely cautious about what I was doing, because the idea was to actually do this for years and years and years and years. I wanted to make some kind of lifestyle out of it. I don't know. It acted on me like a drug, and I thought that I had an infinite supply of drugs just for me, and I like the idea of having this infinite supply around me at all times.
As someone who's has an interest in cannibalism, I'm sure that you've come across a lot of literature talking about different people's descriptions of the experience. And I know that you say that to you it wasn't a culinary purpose for it, but you've got sayings like human flesh is like long pig, for example, and being described as being similar to pork. Do you feel like from the literature that you read and the descriptions that you read and then your experience, do you feel like those descriptions were accurate, or do you feel like it was different?
Yeah, so for me, I compared it to horse meat, but it's just because I used to eat steak tartare at that time, and it comes from horse meat, and the horse meat is sweeter than cow meat. It's more dense. The density is tighter. Usually there's less fat, tissue. So this is why I compare the taste to that. But from what I have read and from what I understand about the human mind, people tend to compare those kind of exceptional experiences to things that they know. And for example, people who actually compare human meat to pork are people who actually have a diet based on pork. and I'm talking about New Guinea cannibals, for example, who pork is the only animal that they can have access to in terms of meat. They don't have cows. So this is why they compare human meat to long pigs.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the only thing they know. So yeah, I think that's one of the key to understand why they compare the meat of human beings to pork. Yeah.
Once you actually had engaged in cannibalism and realized that you were a cannibal, did you feel a connection between you and other people? You talked about Issei Sagawa, there's Jeffrey Dahmer, there's a lot of different cannibals. Did you feel like you kind of you fell into that category of those kind of human beings?
You know, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, it actually happened while I was doing it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that was, you can imagine my surprise and my, I don't know, my obsession with the case when it happened, because here was this guy who was actually doing this on a much larger scale, of course. So yeah, I was reading every news story and watching the news on TV all the time, and trying to get as much info as I could on the case. And it's funny because the few people who knew me back then, they knew, because some of the people I would meet at metal shows, some of them, not all, of course, but there's a few that actually went to my place and they saw bones. And when the Jeffrey Dahmer story happened, they would call me like that, Jeffrey Dahmer. And they had absolutely no clue that what I was actually doing while working in a morgue.
Wow.
They knew I was working in a morgue, but of course I didn't tell them the full story. So yeah, I got called this a few times, which is funny when you think about it. Yeah.
So you're on this kind of like upscale launching point of you committing crimes. So you were engaging in grave robbing, and then you started drinking human blood, and then engaging in cannibalism, and eventually you would reach a point where you actually would murder someone. Yeah. Before we would get into the specifics of that, when did you start feeling an urge to take someone's life?
It was part of this obsession with death, physical death, and actually taking a life. For me, it was the logical conclusion to what was going on in my life. Plus, I had developed a lot of anger when I was a teenager, or like many teenagers. Except for me, it was fueled by isolation and the inability to make friends at school, and the fact that I just couldn't understand human interactions. So all the friendships that I had before I was arrested were extremely shallow, and the only friends I had were people I had met during in metal clubs and concerts. And even them, I just couldn't feel any kind of bond with them. And most of them, they were just listening to their music and their bands. And, it was a time also when death metal was developing fast. There were all those new bands like D-Side and Cannibal Corpse, and all those lyrics about killing people and, extreme gory stuff. And it felt like, for me, it was just music for those kids. Whereas for me, they had like a deeper meaning. Yeah.
What's your earliest memory of wanting to kill someone?
Oh, when I was in school, uh, junior high school,
Mm-hmm.
I was about 13, 12, 13. And it was in Portugal, and I just couldn't fit in because all the other kids that's in the school were Portuguese, and I couldn't understand the language. And it escalated over the months. And I was also beginning to read a lot about crime and true crime in general. So when you first read about those things, one of the things that you wonder is how they get away with it. See, so for me, it was focusing on that and maybe thinking about ways of doing those kind of things without getting caught. So yeah, I had those very specific obsessions when I was a teenager. Yeah.
So when you were thinking about those, having your first experience thinking about killing someone, did you ever act any of that out at first? Do you have a history of engaging in any kind of violence before you actually took the step of murdering someone?
Yeah. There was a few times at school where I brought weapons, and I got kicked out a few times of class because they found out about the weapons. And when I was in the university, I also brought a weapon, and I was kicked out of I was studying psychology. So it was weird for a psychology student to actually have a weapon on him. So yeah, they just decided to kick me out of the university. Then I joined the army, and in the army I actually learned how to use guns and clean them up and all the things you have to learn about guns, actually. And I developed this interest in firearms. Yeah, there's a few violent things that happen. I'm not going to linger on them. But yeah, there was a few things before.
And so how old were you, what year was it when you finally decided that you were going to take someone's life, and can you walk us through the steps of that whole process?
I had this plan in my head, and it was more about my coworkers, because I was definitely wanting to get rid of them. I just couldn't stand them anymore. And I came to the logical conclusion that if I kill them one after the other, I would be actually in charge of the morgue, and then I would be able to actually decide who would be working there or not. So yeah, I know it sounds completely weird, a weird way of thinking, processing information, but yeah, I decided that I wanted to get rid of them. And I was dating this girl who was a professional dominatrix, and she was using this system to actually get in touch with clients. And it was some kind of network that existed at the time. It was way before the internet, but you contacted people through a terminal, and it was linked to a phone, and people would give you their phone number, you would call them, and they would give you their address. So that's how she got her clients, and it was totally anonymous because she would contact them from phone booths. It was a time also when you could do those things while staying anonymous. See, I don't think you would be able to do that nowadays. everything is traceable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, back in those days, you could actually go to public libraries, use those terminals, and contact those people, then go to their places.
So it's like a BDSM network to meet other
Yeah.
people? Okay.
Exactly. So yeah, I contacted this person, and there's something that triggered me, the question that he asked, and so I decided to go and kill him. It was also for me like some kind of test, to actually test the effectiveness of a weapon that I had. So this is what I did. So I actually went to that person's place, and I shot him when he opened the door several times. Yeah.
From what I read, when you entered his apartment, you shot him, and I think you got him in the eye, but it didn't kill him instantly. What was that experience like? Can you walk us through what it felt like walking into his apartment, and then were you feeling anxiety? Were you feeling panicked, or were you feeling an adrenaline rush knowing that you were about to kill someone?
It was more of an adrenaline rush, and I was focused on what to do, and focused on staying discreet, because it took place indoors. So I was concerned about noise, which might sound weird because I was actually using a handgun, but you have to understand that he was using a 22 caliber weapon, and they don't make much noise inside. It's like a door slam.
Yeah.
But the thing is, people don't notice one single door slam, but if they hear like 3, 4, 5 door slams in a row, this might sound weird. So I was, I began to be concerned about people hearing what was going on. And this is why I left the apartment before I could actually do anything more. So all in all, it took like 15 minutes.
When you fired your weapon and it didn't kill him instantly, what did you feel? Did you feel panic that it didn't work right away? Did you feel empathy that you had hurt him? What was that experience like?
No empathy, no. I felt detached, and I was actually observing things and watching things on the side. But there was actually absolutely no emotion.
How long? So you shoot him, and does he collapse to the ground?
Yeah, face first.
Yeah, and then you noticed that he was still alive. How long before you fired and tried to kill him after that?
At least 5 minutes. Yeah.
So you were just observing him?
Yeah, it felt like an eternity, yeah.
What did that look like? What did that feel like?
Oh, I was just observing. I sat in a corner, and my mind was racing in 10,000 different directions at the same time. At the same time, I was trying to focus back on what I was here for. And it was a mix of chaos and some kind of spiritual experience. And it felt like, actually observing the work of the Grim Reaper. So I was feeling detached from what I was actually doing, but at the same time, I knew that I was at the center of it.
So you observe him for a while, and then what are the next steps that you take in ultimately taking his life?
I fired several other shots, and there were more in rapid succession this time. And I picked up a heavy object, and I dropped the object on the head. And after a couple of minutes, he stopped breathing. So I knew that it was over.
Once you knew that he was gone, did you feel different? What was that experience like, knowing that you had ultimately taken his life?
Yeah, I was focused on the sounds in the staircase, because I was hearing footsteps, and I was focused on being torn between staying and having to leave. But I decided to leave because I knew that people might have heard the gunshots. So I prefer to leave. Yeah.
What was the difference between before you actually went to his apartment and killed him? I'm sure you had a fantasy or a thought in your head of how things were going to play out. And then when you actually did it, what was the difference between what you had in your head and what happened in reality? Did it feel different than what you imagined?
Or yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, I thought it would be quicker in a way, and it's hard to say if I really was focused on doing something more or not. I was not sure. Yeah, like mutilation or things like that, because nothing actually was stopping me from doing it, because I was actually doing those autopsies, so I knew how to use those tools, and I did it on cadavers. And when you actually work in a morgue, you learn how to, for example, to open up a skull and get the brain inside with a saw. So those kind of things I had done them before, or it wouldn't have bothered me to actually do similar things. More primitive tools, maybe, but yeah. Yeah, and I came equipped with scalpels and several blades, actually, of scalpel blades, and plastic bags. But no, I didn't use any of this, just because I was, concerned about the noise.
Yeah. If you hadn't had that factor of worrying about someone catching you, what was your plan? Were you going to take pieces home to eat him, or what was your intention?
Yeah, there was this thing about decapitation, because I was curious about, how hard it would be to actually cut through the tissue of the neck.
Mm-hmm.
I had read somewhere that the ligatures around the bones around in the neck, they were extremely hard to cut through. And at the same time, I wanted to actually, I don't know, there was something about having the head and actually getting rid of it somewhere public, so that everybody would see it the following day. Yeah, something, for show, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So even though you weren't able to fully execute your plan, did you end up, how you felt as a person walking to his apartment, and then when you left his apartment, knowing that you had killed someone, did you feel a shift or change in you as a person after you had done that?
Oh yeah. I know there was no turning back anymore. Because when you do this, you actually go against the natural order. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You break things that cannot be glued back, and you cut the umbilical cord that attach you to the rest of people.
Yeah.
So you become, it's like an alchemy thing. Except that you change reality around you. And there's this ritualistic feeling that overwhelms you. So yeah, you definitely feel different. But I would say, it's not about, the act itself, because I've met, as you can imagine, when I was in prison, I've met plenty of different killers with different motives. And I never met anyone who had this kind of spiritual dimension. For them, murder was a matter of getting rid of evidence, or being overwhelmed by the situation, or just saying, "Oh yeah, it wasn't me; it was a monster living in my brain." But I feel much better now. So there was absolutely no spiritual or intellectual meaning to what they do or what they've done. And in that way, I feel unique from other killers' experiences.
Did you feel, you talk about feeling a spiritual feeling engaging in murder. Did you feel a satisfaction that you had accomplished it?
Yeah, definitely. And it was just a step to my evolution to something else or someone else. Mm-hmm. This is a concept that I like in the Hannibal books. What's his name? Thomas Harris, the writer. Yes, Thomas Harris, who wrote the Hannibal books. There's always this concept of the killer actually becoming something else through the murders that they commit. So I like this idea, and this I can relate to, the actual transformation of the self. I'm not talking about elevation of the self, because this implies that you are you are morally trying to justify things. And for me, in my case, it's not about morals, but more about, elevating myself in the sense of spiritual experience.
So, after you commit the crime, how long before you ended up getting caught, and how did you get caught?
3 weeks after. And I used the ID papers from the person. So the police had my photo, and they caught me in front of a club. I was waiting for someone in front of this club, so they had my picture on them. So it was quite easy for them to actually connect the dots. And of course, when they searched my apartment, and they saw everything that I had, and the weapon too. So yeah, there was no point in denying.
So they caught you in front of a club. How did the police confront you? What was you being arrested, that experience like?
First, I said that I had found the papers on the street, and that. But I knew that they would end up searching my place, so I was just trying to buy more time so I could actually think of ways of hiding certain things from them. I don't know. I was trying to buy time, But actually, a few hours later, they searched my apartment. They saw the things. So, I had to confess to a few things. And later on, there was this, because at first they wondered where I got all those things from, especially the bones, and plus there was other weapons in my apartment, and they had to do ballistics on them. So this lasted a while, and during the following months, I had to change my story several times, because, they were asking themselves a lot of questions, of course. So I had to adapt myself to that. There were several psychiatric assessments over the following years. Because in France, a murder trial like this, it happens like 3 or 4 years after being arrested. And it's time for them to actually investigate on the circumstances of the crime. And for example, they have you reenact the crime with someone playing the victim. And they have to do the psychology assessment. Usually it only lasts a few weeks, but in my case it lasted for 2 years, because they had to get assessments from six different psychiatrists, and there were counter assessments. So it lasted so much time, and at the end of several years, 3 years, they had enough material to actually charge me with premeditated murder. Because the defense was looking for a dismissal of the case because of insanity plea. When you get an insanity plea, the case is dismissed and you're sent to a psychiatric hospital. And this is what happened actually with Segawa. He was declared insane, sent to a hospital, and released like 4 years after. So they wanted to not that to happen again, of course. So they did everything in their power to actually charge me with the crime and declare me sane. But at the same time, there was this psychiatric assessment that said that I was suffering from a form of psychosis during the commitment of the crime. This is why it lasted so long, and the trial itself was really focused on the results of the psychiatric assessment.
What was the ultimate conclusion from the psychiatric assessment? Did they diagnose you with anything, or?
Yeah, well, there was no conclusive. That's the thing. There was no conclusive conclusion. There are different conclusions. So it was a battle of experts. So the prosecution, of course, was saying that I was totally fully aware of what was going on, and that I was actually a sexual sadist, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the murder was a, how do you say, to say things plainly, they thought that I was too dangerous to be sent to a psychiatric unit and be released like 4 or 5 years after. So for them, they were actually saying that I was fully aware of what was going on. But at the same time, on the other side, there was this psychiatrist who said that I was suffering from those uh, ailments, and um, that the jury had to take that into consideration to determine a set sentence. And this is ultimately what happened. So they declared me fully responsible, not fully responsible, but with diminished capacity, which under French law means it's a maximum of 15 years in prison. And the jury, well, my lawyer used the fact that the trial was happening at the same time that the Cannes Festival in Cannes. It's a festival in France with an international film festival. Mm-hmm. And there were like 3 or 4 different movies that year competing. One movie was Funny Games. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's about those 2 psychopaths.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Who break in a house and they torture the people inside, etc. So my lawyer, she used the fact that those kind of movies were shown. There was also The Brave with Johnny Depp, actually directed by Johnny Depp, about a snuff film. And she said, see what's going on in Cannes, all those violent movies. And my client was influenced by all this violence around him, and he would go to these death metal shows and with lyrics about killing people. And since he was already suffering from psychosis, this totally influenced him for the murder. So the jury, listening to that and seeing what was going on in the news, they were like, okay. And they sentenced me to 12 years. Yeah.
So what can you tell us about your experience in prison? What was that like? How did people perceive you when they became aware of your crime?
So the first years, it was the investigation, actual investigation. And they started to talk about a few things that they found in my apartment. Plus, during the psychiatric assessment, I had told the psychiatrist about what I had been doing in the morgue and the blood bank. Mm-hmm. And I had to explain where I found the remains that they found, the bones, the skulls, why one of the skulls was drenched in blood, and they found out that it wasn't my blood, so I had to explain where the blood was coming from. So all of those things, they were picked up by the press, and it was used by tabloids to build this image of a vampire, even though I never identified myself as being a vampire or being part of any kind of vampire movement or vampire subculture or whatever. But yeah, they use that word because it sells paper. So there was that, and I started to get mail from people who actually were writing criminals. And some of them were asking me if I ever painted. And that gave me the idea to actually paint, because I found out that a good way to kill time and focus on something else. And things developed from that. And I started to actually... I actually got mail once from a serial killer called Patrick Carney, the trash bag killer from California, and I was surprised because he was writing in perfect French. And I understood that I could actually get letters and send letters to other criminals around the world. And there was also the fact that they did not read English in the mailroom or in the prison where I was locked up. So it was easy for me to actually send and receive letters to other prisons. And this is what I did. I ended up writing with more than 25 killers, with people like Richard Ramirez, Doc Clark, Arthur Shawcross, Keith Jasperson, all those people who are still alive. Well, some of them are still alive, but some of them aren't.
Mhm.
And Roy Norris, Jan Brady, many people. Yeah.
Did you ever end up writing to Issey Sagawa since he was such a big influence on you?
Oh yeah. That's an interesting thing. So the fun thing about this is that I actually got his address from Jan Brady, who, because I said I don't remember exactly how it came out. I think I asked Jan if he knew someone in his circle who actually knew inmates in Japan. And then in the following letter, I was explaining that I was interested in the Sagawa case, and he answered that he knew Colin Wilson, who was a writer specialized in true crime, who actually had written a big article on Sagawa. So he ended up by finding the address for me, and Sagawa was living in a Tokyo suburb back in those days. And I got an answer like 2 or 3 weeks later. And that was great because, the circle was full, I guess. So we ended up corresponding for about 10 years after that. And then I stopped hearing from him. But we did several things together, like when I was released, we actually worked on the same painting, and we did this several times, and the paintings were shown in a gallery in Tokyo called Vanilla Gallery, and you can sometimes see those paintings in the Murderabilia website.
Wow, that's amazing. So you talked about being released. You were sentenced for 12 years, but you didn't end up serving all 12 years, correct?
Yeah. Under French law, I was able to be released after serving the 2/3, which was nearly 8 years. Yeah.
What was it like getting back released into society after serving that time? Did it feel different coming back into the world? I know that technology changes and things like that too. Yeah, exactly. The first few weeks I was very disoriented. When you see the same people for several years and your line of vision doesn't go as far as a wall a few meters away from you, and suddenly you're in an open space and you see all those different faces. I was living in Paris at the time, so I was, walking the streets and seeing all those people, and I actually was staring at everybody around me because I had to analyze all this new info. And it took me a while to get used to see all those new faces again. And I had a lot of headaches during the first weeks. But yeah, it took me a while to get used to it. And I decided to leave Paris a couple of months after I was released. And I went to Sweden. And it was the beginning of a life spent in several countries before I moved back to France. Yeah. And now you run Serial Pleasures that you talked about. When did you start Serial Pleasures and started selling Murderabilia and selling paintings? Before actually creating my own website, I had found work in a morgue again. So just after being released from prison, I was, I would get asked by national TV and production teams to do documentaries, and sometimes I would actually answer interviews and do those shows. For example, there was this show in Portugal. They flew me over to Portugal for a week, and they did this 1.5 hour show
where they use this crew of 30 people using a Luma camera. It's this camera that's built on a crane, and they actually rented the big cemetery in Lisbon, so they could recreate the scenes where I was actually walking in a graveyard with lights behind me in the middle of the night. It was crazy. So I was living this life where I was, going to clubs and people would recognize me, etc. But then several things happened that made me want to keep a low profile, because I just couldn't deal with this kind of life. And it was feeding my ego in a way, but at the same time, it was becoming out of control, and it deeply affected the people around me, and making things really difficult in terms of privacy. And I decided to just keep a low profile, and this is what I did for several years. I found work in a morgue, so it was vital for me not to do interviews or things that I would get me recognized, because I had, I was using different ID papers, and so I had to keep a low profile for this. So this is why I refused to do interviews for a period of 10 years. People thought that I was dead, actually, because I wasn't going to clubs anymore. I wasn't, And then after 10 years of working in different hospitals in Paris, even Catholic institutes and different morgues, I started to get recognized again, and it kind of spread like wildfire in the scene, in the deaf worker industry. So, people ended up knowing, and I was fired off from 2 different places. So I decided just to, that wasn't a life for me anymore. And I decided to just focus on painting, because I was good at it, and I think I still am. And on writing, because that's my other passion. And I created my own publishing company, Serial Pleasures Publishing. And I created the website, Serial Pleasures. And there was this guy I knew from a long time ago, who was a special effects artist, and he could create all those objects using silicone. So that's what we did. We created adult toys.
And so you have 3 adult toys on the market right now on Serial Pleasures, right?
Yeah, I have 3 ones. We also do action figures. Mm-hmm. We do busts. I do T-shirts. I do all kind of different products, and I just, love the idea of selling those kind of products, because it's what we call serial killer culture, when true crime becomes entertainment. And true crime, the narrative of true crime is not owned by journalists anymore, mm-hmm. and TV people. And it's owned by, the narrative is owned by the ones who commit the crimes. So that's a totally different perspective. And this is why I love books written by serial killers, because they are way more interesting than your average true crime book that's written by a journalist. So yeah, I decided to, for example, I'm releasing this Richard Ramirez book, but it's written from the perspective of the people who actually were pen pals, or were in love even, or had this close relationship with him, or were just fascinated by the character, and even if they were too young to actually have any kind of interaction with him. It's fascinating because it tells you a lot about, the dynamics between those who write killers and the killers themselves. So I wanted to do this book, and I ended up with this ton of information and photos and accounts from different people from all walks of life. So I'm really proud of this book that I'm releasing soon.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that one. I know that you interviewed Taylor from Cult Collectibles for that book, so.
Exactly, yeah. I had Taylor in the book. It was really interesting. I had Eva, who was his first girlfriend. She's from the band Christian Death. And she used to visit him before he was even sentenced to death. So that was in county jail.
Wow.
You can imagine all the things that he told her in county jail when he was still being under investigation for the crimes. So that's a very cool account from her. And I have all the big names, the major names in the murderabilia market, of course. But I also have like accounts from just, girls who maintain this pen friends relationship with him, or used to call him, have him on the phone from time to time. There's a section of the book which is focused on his art and the evolution of his artwork. And some even call it a devolution because at first he was drawing those satanic symbols, those demons, with very, very bright colors, and using his Night Stalker signature and all those satanic symbols on the drawings. And then he got censored by the prison. He was sent to the hole a few times because of what he had, the stuff that he actually was writing in the letters and the stuff that he was drawing. So there's a marked devolution in his artwork, and it became like drawings of comic book characters and pin-ups. So yeah, that's a very interesting chapter in the book.
Talking a little bit more about your books, I have them right here. You have your cannibal cookbook that you made, and then you also have your biography. What can you tell us about both of these books, and for people who might be unfamiliar with them and who might be interested in picking them up?
Yeah, the Cannibal Cookbook is what the name is. It's recipes from actual killers, and some are directly inspired by confessions. So it's interesting. It's also illustrated with my paintings. Yeah, it's one of those things that you like to show to people who come and visit you, and just before you have them for dinner. See, but yeah, people like the book. It's a great gift book too. People buy this for gifts. Great gift idea. The other book you mentioned is the Gospel of Blood, which is part one of my biography. I actually wrote my biography in French a few years ago. And the Gospel of Blood is the translation of the first part, which is about my youth and the evolution of my crimes, and how I developed myself as a criminal, and the first prison years and the trial. So it's focused on that. And part two, I'm actually working on part two, the translation of part two, which will be about all the years that I spent in morgues and all the experiences that I had, and also the people that I met in prison. There was a few serial killers, French serial killers, though, so there were very interesting conversations with them. And about the years where I was answering to all those TV interviews, and there's a lot of anecdotes from that part of my life, and up until recent years, up until the creation of Serial Pleasures.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to see read part two.
I'm looking forward to releasing it.
Well, in addition, so this is kind of one of my last questions, is in addition to the different things that you sell on Serial Pleasures, which is your books and your art and your sex toys, you also sell Murderabilia. And one of the items that I recently purchased from you is an actual human skull that was taken from the catacombs of Paris. And I was wondering if you could tell me how you got your hands on that skull and kind of the history behind that.
Yeah, you have to understand there's two parts to the catacombs of Paris. There's one part for the tourists, where you can actually, I've done it before, but so it means you can actually do it. You can actually pick up a few things, but usually you do not find complete skulls in those places, in this special part of the catacombs, because either they're glued to the rest of the bones, or there's cameras everywhere, so it's not easy. But there's another part of the catacombs which is closed to the public. So it's a network. Basically, it's a network of tunnels, and there's entire tunnels that are filled with human bones. And when I say filled, it's filled. It's like walking on top of bones, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand that those bones, they come from medieval graveyards, and there was no space left in those graveyards, so they had to dig up all the bones and put them underground in those tunnels. So those bones, they date back from the 16th, 17th century, maybe, for the most recent ones, and the older ones must be even older than that. So yeah, and there's some nice skulls down there.
So the skull that you sold me, is that one that you go into the other area of the catacombs, and that's where you find them?
Yeah, from the other part of the catacombs. Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate you selling that to me. That's my first human skull, and it's really cool that I was able to get it from you.
It won't be the last, I can tell you. Once you put your hand in this. No, it's actually really, honestly, for me, skulls are a great investment.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you will always find somebody who will buy it from you if you need to sell it. And it's just so cool to have a skull.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated with skulls, and I still have skulls at my place. So, plus each skull is different from another. So it's like they have their own personality in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
So, there's what we call the patina. The patina is like the shine and the color and the shape, the shape that they have, the fact that they have no teeth, or they have a few teeth, or just a partial mandibula. So there's so many different factors that make a skull unique. Plus, when you have a skull at home, you always wonder what was the person like when he or she was alive. So sometimes you give them names.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've given a name to your skull.
I haven't named my skull yet, no. But I have it in a really nice display, and it's one of my prized possessions within my collection.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Cool. It's more than an object, see what I mean? Of course, it's, there's something mystical about, having skulls. And, monks, medieval monks, usually in the medieval times, their only possession on earth was actually a skull on their bedside table. And they would meditate with the skull before going to bed, or, it was their most prized possession. And there's a sect. Well, I don't like to call them a sect because it's not the appropriate word, but that's the word that we use in the Western world. But there's a sect of people in India called the Agori, and they practice a branch of Shiva worship, and their only possession on earth is a skull. So they meditate all day long over the skull. And they live next to funeral pyres, so they are covered in human ashes all the time. And that for them is their way of achieving holiness. So that, I think I find this extremely interesting. And this is something I can relate to, actually.
Yeah, there's definitely a significance and a sacredness to owning an object like that. I mean, that was a whole person's life, So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, and you just being so open and honest about your history. And I'm definitely going to have you back on the show. So thanks for coming on, and thanks for helping me so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Murderabilia Show and Tell. I hope that you found our interview interesting, and if you want to know more about Nico Claux, I've got links to all of his social media down in the description below. Until next time, this is Murderabilia Show and Tell.